However, there's this little bit of a problem. I don't know, a problem, an issue, an idea, an invention that I don't think the founding fathers, or to be honest, anybody or any country that was founded hundreds and hundreds of years ago thought about this idea of the internet. Welcome to Life of a CISO. I'm Dr. Eric Cole, your host, and we'll be taking you on a journey each week on what it takes to be a CISO and what are solutions that you can implement today if you are currently a Chief Information Security Officer or if you want to be one in the future. This is Life of a CISO. Welcome, 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 welcome. Here we go. You know what time it is. It's time for Life of a CISO with yours truly. Dr. E is in the house. This is going to be a little bit of a different style podcast because what I want to talk about on this episode is cyber law, or the law and cyber, or if we want to just be open and honest, the non-existence of laws on the internet. It's a crazy, crazy thing, but the laws that are governing what we do, how we operate, how we function, what we can or can't do, what is and is not legal in the physical realm have been around for hundreds of years. And yes, they've been updated and they've been changed and they've been enhanced. But if you really look at it, the Constitution and the amendments, they have been pretty solid, good to go in the physical world. However, there's this little bit of a problem. I don't know, a problem, an issue, an idea, an invention that I don't think the founding fathers, or to be honest, anybody or any country that was founded hundreds and hundreds of years ago thought about this idea of the internet, the idea of the worldwide super information highway. Because here's the problem, my friends. The problem is traditional laws are based on physical boundaries. So if I'm in the US, I have to follow US laws. Now, even if, and this is the crazy part, right? Even if I'm an American citizen with an American passport, if I go to Russia, do I have to follow, and I'm physically in Russia, do I have to follow US laws or Russia laws? Well, of course, Russia laws. But I'm not Russian. I know, but if you travel to that country, you need to be aware of the laws. And if you're not aware of the laws and you violate the laws, you can get arrested. And we've seen many, many cases. I don't need to call them out, right? Some have been very known people. Some have been unknown people that we've never heard about. But we've heard all these different cases where people travel to another country. They don't know the laws. They do something that is legal in the US, but not legal in that country, and they get arrested. And that's sort of one of the craziest things that's not so crazy, is ignorance of the law is not a valid plea. Now, I know when I play with that a little bit, some people push back at different levels going, but wait a second. If I'm not aware of a law, how can I be held accountable for it? Well, the concept is this. You should. If you're in a country or performing certain duties, you should know that laws exist and you have to abide by them even if you don't know what they are. And here's why that's so important. If ignorance of the law is a valid plea, think of how easy it would be to get out of speeding tickets. It's a great day. I got my tunes cranking, my top down, the sun shining, a nice breeze. I'm cruising down the highway. Life is a highway, right? And we're having great, and all of a sudden, I get pulled over. And the police officer says, "Do you know how fast you were going?" And I go, "Yes." And they go, "Do you know what the speed limit is?" And I go, I actually don't. I was driving, but I was paying attention to the road and staying on the road. And when those speed limit signs came up, I didn't really pay attention to them. So honestly, I have no idea what the speed limit actually is. And if I was actually telling the truth and ignorance of the law is a valid plea, police officer would have to let me off. You have to be like, okay, sir, next time I need you to really pay attention to those speed limit signs. I really need you to pay attention so I can give you a ticket. That's not how it works. If you drive a car and you are operating on a road, you should know what the basic speed limits are, and you should look for speed limit signs. It is your responsibility to know the law. If you're going on a road and you honestly thought it was 55, but it was really 35, and you get pulled over, you're going to get a ticket, and it's valid and it's legit. So there's this crazy concept that even if you don't know laws, you still have to abide by them. But they're based on physical locale. If I'm in the US, I have to abide by US laws. If I'm in Russia, I have to abide by Russian laws. But where are you on the internet? I know, and we know with IP addresses, you can geolocate and you could find out where somebody is, but we also know that with VPNs and others, we can actually appear to be in different places on the internet. So question, I'm sitting here in Washington, D.C., and I decide to connect to the internet through a VPN, and I select Australia. So now my IP address is an Australian IP address. And now I'm visiting or performing a business transaction with somebody in Russia. Which laws apply? Physically in the United States, I'm technically connected to the internet from Australia, and I'm conversing and doing business with somebody in Russia. And the problem is there are no universal laws. Laws are depicted by country, and sometimes, like in the US, by state. So now we have this weird dilemma where, okay, if we take tech out of the picture, there's no internet, there's no cyber, there's no VPNs, there's nothing like that, it works really well. Because if I'm in the US, I'm in the US. There's no way I could physically be in the US and be committing a crime in another country. It just doesn't make any sense. So the laws of having all these different countries with different laws and different agreements and all that worked really, really well until the internet. The internet, there are no boundaries. When you're surfing the internet, you can seamlessly go between different countries, different states, and you don't even, half the time, you don't even know where the website is that you're visiting. And here's the cool part. You don't care, except what happens when we start layering in the law on top of this? What happens if crimes get committed? What happens if your company, and this is where it's important for a chief information security officer not to become a lawyer, but to work with lawyers and understand the general law, because the reality is, what if your company is doing business in other countries? Or where this really comes up for companies is physical offices. So I am a US-based company. My policies are based on US law. Do you realize that US law is different than German law, Russian law, Australian law? There's some things that you can do in terms of privacy and monitoring and access to personal information you can do in the United States that you can't do in other countries. So now you start getting into this interesting aspect where a US-based company is putting together policies that are perfectly legit and perfectly legal in the United States. Then we decide to expand and grow. And now we have offices all around the world. So now we have people in different countries. So, okay. So now, as a chief information security officer, we now have to go in and we have to have different policies for different countries. So if you're working in Russia, there's one policy what we can or can't do. And if you're in the US, there's another policy. Problem. From a server, from an electronic, from a data source, companies normally are not structured that way. A lot of US-based companies just have large data centers. A lot of information is moving to the cloud. So now a US employee, a UK employee, a Russian employee are all in the same software in the same database, but there's different policies. So now, from a monitoring standpoint, in terms of monitoring activity, looking for alerts, delving into details, you might be doing something as a security professional that if you're doing that for somebody who's in the US, it might be legal, but if you're doing that for somebody in another country, it's not. And then we get even more complicated. What if I'm a US company, but for redundancy purposes and failover, I have data centers all around the world? If I have a server that's physically in Germany, but I'm a US company and I'm using that for redundancy and failover, so if something happens in the US, my data is still protected, whose laws do I have to abide by? Whose laws am I covered by? And that gets even more fun is, okay, what happens when a US employee travels and decides to work out of the Russian office for 2 months? So you can start to see that this is a problem, my friends. This is a huge, huge problem, and one that, in my opinion, has been ignored for way too long. So some of these questions actually don't have answers. Like I've worked with attorneys, and if you work with really, really good attorneys, what would a really good attorney tell you when you give them a specific question? It depends. It depends on so many different factors. And it's the same thing here. So it's one of these where we're dealing with a situation where there's a lot of unknowns. Over the next 5 years, there's going to be a lot of firsts. I can guarantee we're going to have situations where US companies are going to be sued by other governments or servers seized because what they were doing in the US was legal, but their data, their activity, their employees, their servers, or other things were in different locations or different countries. So we start to get into all these problems. So let me sort of take a little tangent. If you're looking for a career change, you have teenagers or kids or nieces or nephews or anyone you care about, and they're not sure what they want to do. Cyber law, I keep saying somebody who has a degree in cybersecurity that also is an attorney, you will be able to print money over the next 5 to 10 years. Because this is a problem. It's a huge problem. There's very few people that are trained on it. And the reality, whether we like it or not, and people always tell me I'm nuts and I'm crazy, and I think that's the ultimate compliment. When people start saying I'm normal, that's when I get worried. Right? If you tell me I'm crazy, I'm good. When too many people start going, Eric, that's very normal or logical, or you're actually making a lot of sense to me, I get really scared. Right? I don't want to be normal. Right? You want to be a little off the rocker. But the reality is this. I firmly believe at some point in the future, we are going to have global laws. I don't know if the UN sort of expands into a law enforcement agency, or we create this new global council like out of Star Wars or some of these movies. But the reality is this. The internet is not country bound. The internet is boundaryless, is countryless. So we have this worldwide internet where there are no customs. When I'm in the real world and I leave a country and go into a new country, I know that I have to go through customs, immigration, passport, right? Welcome to America or welcome to Germany. I mean, it's very clear that you're going to a different country and you must be aware and understand the laws and regulations. On the internet, there's no customs. If I'm going to visit a website in another country, I don't have to show a digital passport. So the reality is this: one of two things has to happen, because this can't exist. This idea where basically we have this information superhighway, the internet, that's the wild, wild west. People are doing this already and it's going to continue. There are certain countries in which hacking, stealing information or stealing data outside the country is not illegal. So if I go to one of those countries and I start hacking and stealing people's information, their identity, their money, selling it, and I'm in that country, the activity that I'm doing is not technically illegal, because that country says you can't physically steal money or identities within the country. But those laws are so outdated, they don't cover the internet. So technically, the way those laws are written, it's actually legal. You can't actually arrest somebody for hacking outside the country. So that's problem one. Problem two, many countries don't have extradition treaties. For example, if Russia, if somebody's in Russia and they're a Russian citizen and they commit a crime in the United States and go back to Russia, Russia will not hand that person over to us. We don't have an extradition treaty. Some countries will. Some countries will give those people up, but Russia and a few others are not like that. So now we have this other situation where, okay, first, it's not even illegal, but let's get them and bring them back to the United States where it is illegal. But then there's no extradition treaty, so there's no way we can do that. So we're in a situation right now where I know some of you know this, but cybercrime is a massive rampage. I mean, it's doubling and tripling. It's in the billions and I mean, it is out of control. And for all intensive purposes, there's not a lot you can do about it. There really isn't. I have friends of mine who are like, Eric, my social media pages are getting taken down. I'm being extorted. I'm doing all this. And I'm like, strong passwords, change devices, burn phones. They're like, but can't we go after them? I'm like, the reality is we know who they are, but they're in countries where it's not illegal and there's no extradition treaty. So there's nothing you can really do about it. So imagine the frustration level where essentially people can commit crimes and there's nothing we can do about it. There's really nothing we can do legally about it. That's pretty frustrating. That's pretty, I mean, that really gets me angry and mad because that's not how it should be. So we really have two realities because there's no way this can continue, right? This was never envisioned, right? The internet, I sort of joke it was planned, but I don't think anybody really thought it was going to take off and be created the way it was. It's one of those things that it was built, and after it's built, you're like, it would have been nice to know what we were building and have a better blueprint. Like to actually have, I mean, ideally, to have different networks, have access points between those different networks, have a back. I mean, if we were designing the internet today with the current physical laws and countries and geostructure in place, we would create this global backbone, which is like the oceans, right? There's international waters, right? International waters where there's no laws, right? Or I'm not a lawyer, I probably didn't say that correctly, but like there's certain waters where not a specific law. I think there must be some generic stuff there, but like if you're in the middle of the ocean, right, traversing between countries, right, there's some international areas. So you sort of have this international backbone, that's run, monitored, controlled by whatever committee. Every country has their own separate networks, and then they carefully design and connect the super information highway. That's not how it was built. It was actually built as a survivability exercise for the United States. So really, the backbone for the internet, and we're starting to diversify and do a better job, but for all intents and purposes, the backbone of the internet is really the US. So we really can't isolate or disconnect. One of the questions I get asked all the time is, what are all the different connection points to the internet? And that's not that the US has to the internet. And the answer is, we are the internet, right? You really can't answer that like some other countries. So the reality is, this was never really designed to be what it turned into. And it just sort of happened. And here we are. This can't continue. I mean, where you have situations where crimes can be committed and it's not illegal, no extradition, can't do anything about it, that cannot continue. It will get out of control. It's out of control already. So there's really only one or two things that could happen. One, we decide to take down the internet and rebuild it. I don't think we can take down the internet. I mean, I think it would be an amazing social experiment. Like, what if the internet went away for a few years? What if social media went away and like people actually had to talk, pick up the phone, go to meetings? Kids actually had to go outside and play instead of being in social media all day, all night long, right? So I think it would be a good thing. I don't think there's any realistic chance of that happening. The second option is we have to have international laws. Now, there might be some hybrid between those, but the reality is one of those two things has to happen because what we're currently doing can't continue. So the question is, as a CISO, how do you start building and designing and deploying your systems as if international laws existed? Do you actually have your data segmented by different countries? Right now, today, if you're an international company, that's one of your biggest challenges, is actually managing and organizing not only employee, but customer data cross-country, around the world. You know, inter-country database. Because there's so many different laws out there and so many new ones coming out, and the US keeps coming out with new ones, and the EU and everything else, that really for all practical purposes, having all your data in one central place to have the level of security you need, you're going to be breaking laws. Because we need to monitor, do deep packet inspection, do forensic analysis, pull detailed records, right? And in some countries, some of that analysis you can't actually do. Or you actually have to filter out records or do certain things, and record retention is all different in different countries all around the world. So from a CISO standpoint, what we need to start thinking about is our infrastructure, and work with IT of course, but is our infrastructure created and structured in a way that allows us to abide by all the different international laws? I know it's a topic that will come up, right? People will sort of give it lip service. I know a few companies have spent a ton of money, especially with GDPR coming out, and everyone thinking it's going to have a lot of teeth. But the reality is, all of these different privacy laws, the problem with all of them is there's not a consistent enforcement. So many companies have sort of, we'll do a best effort. We'll put some basic things in place to wave our hands. But the reality is our probability of getting caught is pretty low. The analogy that a lot of companies use is on a highway. In the US, I'll just use US, typical speed on most highways, 55, Some are 65. Certain states go up to 75. But the reality is this. On a 4-lane highway, if the speed limit is 55, there are so many cars that are going over the speed limit. Yet only a very small percent get tickets because you can't pull over everybody. Like, there's not enough police officers, there's not enough enforcement to be able to do that. And then you might also live in areas where there's a road that's 15 miles an hour, but nobody goes 15 because it's through a forest, there's trees, there's no shoulder, so there's no way a police officer could be on the side. So really there's no way they could set up a speed trap in any way, shape, or form. So the reality is laws are only as good as the enforcement behind them. And when you're looking at the amount of data, the amount of companies, the amount of information out there, enforcement is just not feasible. Everyone had a lot of high hopes for GDPR, but the reality is the enforcement is not really where it needed to be. So a lot of companies are not actually following GDPR, yet they're not getting fined because there's just not enough enforcement efforts out there. So here's the reality. As a CISO, you need to work with your executives, especially chief legal counsel. I've always said this and I always will. If you're a chief information security officer, your best friend, the person you should be sitting right next to in your office, the person you should get coffee with every morning, the person you should be talking to multiple times a day and getting lunch at least once a week is chief legal counsel. Cyber and the law are so intertwined, there's no way you can know all the law, and there's no way lawyers can know all cyber. You must become BFFs. Only possible way this is going to work, my friends. So the takeaways, and I know I sort of threw a lot, this was different because I did more of ideas, information, sort of getting you thinking about it. But some of the key takeaways is this. If you're looking for a career or know anyone looking for a career, cybersecurity bachelors with a law degree can't go wrong. Printing money. As a CISO, you need to start thinking about, are we really compliant with every single law out there? Is our data really structured and set up correctly? Or are we basically doing like most people do is, well, if it's 55 and I go 60, I'm technically speeding, I'm technically breaking the law, but they're only going to pull over somebody who's going 80. So as long as I'm not the worst offender and I'm just a minor offender, I might be able to get away with it. But is that really the risk posture you want for your company? And is that really the risk posture that the executives know about and are fully aware of? And then the real takeaway is, as you and IT start moving more systems to clouds, I know a lot of companies, some companies are building out new data centers, they're migrating, they're going, as you continue to build out your data plan of data storage and databases and all that, are you taking into account geographic isolation? Where different countries, the data stored differently? Is your database schema and design designed such that it's going to be accountable for making sure you can separate out employees, customers from different countries, different locations? And are you thinking about the impact that the laws have on the internet and cybersecurity? Because the reality is, this is a problem. Just because you haven't got pulled over, just because you might be in that minor offender category, this is a big problem. And if you wait for it to become a problem, it's going to be too late. So if you're in security, you're a CISO, you need to start having discussions with attorneys. You need to start having discussions with your executives and start having just behind closed doors, no notes, no recording, off the record. But how good or how bad are we in really abiding with all the cyber laws, and what do we need to do, and or how much would it cost for us to be able to get fully compliant? The internet was never designed to be what it was, and all of a sudden we have this international network with no boundaries. And the reality is, unfortunately, it's pretty much the wild, wild west.